Thank you. It being shortly after 10 and a quorum being present, I will call to order the August 18th RTPO meeting. I thank everyone for being here. Appreciate you taking time to join us this morning. As we do at the start of each meeting, I will introduce the participants going by my screen, and I do this so that the viewing public, whether they're in attendance now or viewing this at a later date, know who everyone is. Looking at my screen, the first person I see is Sarah Black, and she is the RTPO coordinator. I am Becca Ashby. I represent the city of Port Orchard, and I am chair of the RPTO. Dick Taylor, you want to wave your hand, Dick? Dick is with the Port of Shelton. John Clausen is the executive director of Kitsap Transit. And that's Jim Fetzer, is that correct? And Jim is the new, I'm going to get the title wrong. Let me just say the man in charge of Clallam Transit. And then we have Steve Gray with Clallam County. We have Amy Asher with Mason Transit, Nicole Gauthier with Jefferson Transit, Lindsay Warren-Schwartz, I'm sorry, Lindsay, who is a council person with the city of Port Angeles and the secretary for the RTPO. Leslie Snyder is a councilwoman with Bainbridge Island. Marty is, I'm sure Marty has a last name, Marty Allen is with the Squaxin tribe. And you guys just moved. And then we have Kate Sefaver. I missed it. She's with the Department of Olympic Region Department of Transportation. Ed Coviello, who is with Kitsap Transit and our other RTPO coordinator. Michael Bateman is with the city of Paulsbo. George Mazur is with the Olympic Region Department of Transportation. Kate Dean is a county commissioner, Jefferson County Commissioner. And then Randy peeked in there. Randy Netherland is Mason County Commissioner and our vice chair. Brendan Meyer is representing Clallam Transit, and he is a council person with the city of Port Angeles. Arnie Bacher is with the Port of Bremerton. Rachel Anderson is a council person with the city of Sequim. And Deidre Peterson is a council person with the city of Shelton. And someone else just popped in. Oh, Christine Rolfus is a new member for us, as is Jim. Christine is representing Kitsap County. She is the new Kitsap County Commissioner. You will all know that she was in the state Senate for several years. And I see Vicki Grover has also joined us, and she is with the city of Bremerton. Did I get everyone? Because we had people coming in, and so I'm hoping that I was able to get everyone as they came in. And Christine and Jim, thank you so much for being here this morning.
And Beck, I hear from Ed that his meeting is running a little bit late, so we'll see Ed Stern here shortly. Okay, thank you. Yes, Ed has a meeting directly in front of this one. So again, thank you. Again, appreciate everyone's attendance this morning. The next thing on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there someone who would like to move that we approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Dick. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Is there anyone who would be voting against the motion to approve the agenda? I will ask a second time. The agenda there's a motion to approve with a second. The agenda, is there anyone who would be voting against that? Hearing none, the agenda is approved with unanimous consent. On our consent calendar, we have the minutes from the June 26th meeting and the fourth quarter invoice for the last biennium. And is there anyone who would like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion. Brenda Meyer, move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Thank you. Is there anyone to second that?
This is Amy Asher. I'll second that.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would be voting against the motion to approve the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda stands approved with unanimous consent. Thank you. Now we will get down to our business items this morning. And the first is the first reading of the letter of support policy.
Thank you.
As a little background before I turn this over to Sarah, the RTPO has been authoring support letters for our members since 2019. I don't know if DOT was doing this on our behalf before. We've been offering these for our members to support their grants. And it had come to our attention that we've had just some new requests, some from non-members who were working with members. It became apparent to us that we truly needed a policy on when we could, when I say we, when the RTPO and myself as chair sign a letter in support of our members' grant applications. So with that, we had a committee and we've met a couple of times, and we have a draft policy to bring forth this morning. So Sarah, do you want to lead us through that discussion?
Sure. I'm sorry about that. What you have attached in your on your agenda packet in your brief is sort of the first draft of this policy. And as Beck said, what we're trying to do is just sort of standardize this so that both for applicants, so they know what PRTPO's policy is regarding letters of support, as well as for the chair to know. And in my role as coordinator, the way the process works is that people typically will reach out and contact me. And then I will put the letter together and send it to Beck. But as she said, we did not have a policy authorizing that. So what you see in the agenda packet for today's first reading is the outline, or more than an outline, the draft policy that sort of lays out what our objectives are, what we're trying to accomplish with this policy, but both to give clarity to the applicant as well as to the chair. And then what the policy itself, the way it's laid out, is it just has a few sort of key requirements. First is that, let me just stop 1 second and say, this policy reflects very much how we have done things. So we were not sort of starting from nowhere. So we were really modeling this quite a bit on the way things have worked. So the way it has worked is that typically the policy is that we would provide letters of support for projects from members. Either it's the member's actual project, or that the project is something that the member is actively participating in, or is somebody else might be the lead, but they're actively involved with it. And then the second sort of aspect of this policy is that this project has been available for public review through some kind of a process. And we know that that looks different in each of your organizations and at different stages of project development. And in fact, as the work group talked about it, they said, things that are going for construction funding should have probably been through more rigorous public review than something maybe that's coming up as a planning study that might have been identified, in a more of a community engagement process. But through some means, the project has to have gone through some kind of a public review so that it's not just as opposed to something that somebody just came up with an idea and they want to go get a grant. This would not be a good fit, for this sort of expedited letter of support. And then the third sort of key element of the letter of support policy is that the project needs to be consistent with either the regional transportation plan or with the human services transportation plan. Those are the two core planning programs that PRTPO maintains. And I specify in here too that consistency does not mean that the project is necessarily included in one of those plans. Our plans tend to be policy plans, not project plans. So consistency means that they advance the goals and objectives of the plans that are in place. So if the project does those three things, then this policy would say that is set up for sort of this I'm going to say expedited, a pretty streamlined letter of support process. And then it just spells out what the applicant would send to me. And again, this information is very consistent with what they provide today. A lot of times people want to provide or do provide draft letters for us to start with, or they don't have to, as long as they give me enough information to work with. And then the way the process works is that I would take that request, I would put the draft letter together, I would send that to the chair would review it, maybe make some changes to it. Beck is one who is not shy about saying, I don't like the way this was worded or whatever. And so, we make the revisions. And then once the chair authorizes it, I would execute it and send it on back to the applicant. So that's what's spelled out here. If an applicant is not a member, or if the project is outside of something that the board has considered before or has come up through a local process, that applicant can still come to the board and make their case and all, but it would then be on the board's schedule at that point. So it's a somewhat slower and more cumbersome process, but our members should, this whole thing is meant to help our members get the letters of support that they need and do it in an expedited way, because these grant processes typically have a tight turnaround. So that's the overview of the policy. The way our process works is that this is coming to you today for your discussion as a first read item, and then it would come back to you for approval with any changes that you would recommend today. It would come back to you for approval in October. So with that, I turn it back over to you, Beck, for discussion and any questions or guidance from the board.
Okay, thank you. Several members of the committee are in attendance today. So do they have any input? I see Leslie's here and Amy Asher's here, and Lindsay was part of that, maybe not at the second meeting, and Randy was involved. Are there any comments, Amy? Because I know our transit agencies, occasionally, I don't want to say frequently, but they are members that use these letters of support.
Yeah, we use them frequently, especially during the consolidated grant process. I appreciated how clear the policy is, and I'm glad to see that the requirement to identify the planning process that's already been that the project has already been through is included in this document. So I think it's pretty streamlined, straightforward, and should be helpful when people are submitting letters of request.
Thank you. Leslie and then Randy.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So I think this policy looks good, and I apologize I wasn't able to make it to the second meeting. I've been doing some travel and whatnot. I guess my only comment would be that what I brought up in the first meeting was that the RAISE grant may have provided some angst because it didn't fit, and I don't remember from the discussion how clearly that was. I know that, for instance, I was not asked as a member to sponsor that letter, and I could have. So I assume that that the first bullet point could have been met if it wasn't. The second one, certainly it was elements of that raised grant application were in the Bainbridge Transit Development Plan. We have a sustainable transportation plan. I don't know about the ODT, but then in the regional transportation plan for the PRTPO, the ODT is mentioned. And there's some high-level vision statement about mobility and choices and all that, but it doesn't get very specific. And there's a lot of comments about how we need to be a little bit more focused on transportation choices and climate change and so forth. So I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to the regional transportation plan going forward. But if there's anything that would have that this policy would have precluded, I would certainly like a discussion about that. Thanks.
Just to give history to the board members that perhaps were unaware, the raised grant, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the project, Lindsay, off the top of my head.
Puget Sound to Pacific Trail.
Puget Sound to Pacific Trail. It was one that initiated this conversation between Thera and I, because it was not a member that came to us for the letter of support. It was a nonprofit. And then as time went on and the EV grants became available, and we had non-members working directly with members on EV grants and wanting letters of support. That is what prompted all of this, is we had people asking for letters that were not the lead on it, or that were not members. And so that was what prompted us to feel like we needed a policy. And I will say, as far as the raised grant was concerned, as soon as Port Angeles stepped up and became the lead agency on that and asked us for a letter, they received a letter. And the Squaxin tribe asked for the letter for the EV grant, and we wrote that. But that is definitely what prompted this conversation. So with that, is there any other comments or questions?
I think Randy had something.
Well, he did, and then he took his hand down.
Oh, okay.
Okay, he's just sitting there. So is there more discussion this morning? Okay, Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, the only issue I had, which brought some of this about, is we always have to have some type of policy for safety for everybody. We should never have one person making those decisions unless it's set up in policy to say that that person should make the decisions. This way it takes care of any of those questions that may come up where there's animosity between one organization and another on whether to support something. By putting this policy in place, it's just a good fence for all of us. And remember, good fences make for good neighbors.
And then we would also remind everyone that at the end of the policy, as Sarah said, it does say if a non-traditional applicant comes forward requesting a letter, there is a process for that, but it would go through the executive board. It would not be authorized in this policy without approval of the executive board. Okay, with that, we will bring this back again in October. That gives everybody a little more time to review it, and we will vote on it in October. Moving down the agenda, we have at the same time, we've had about 3 committees going. The other one is the biannual update to our bylaws. And Sarah, I believe you're going to do the first reading on this one also.
I am, thank you. This is back in April. For those of you, I realize we've got some folks here today who were not here in April, so I'll give just a little bit more background. Part of PRTPO's, an element of PRTPO's bylaws is that it calls for them to be reviewed every 2 years to make sure they're still current and meet the needs of the organization. And so that review was conducted this past spring. Beck convened a work group who met in May to discuss this. And at that time, they identified several, I'm going to describe them as small housekeeping cleanups, a couple of typos, and a couple of very simple refinements just to add greater clarity and make sure people aren't, folks who are new coming in aren't confused about what might be intended in the language. But they also identified a couple of other things came up that might be more significant and warranted time. And so that work group presented its findings to the board in June, and the board said, yes, let's take a look at these things. And that is the language regarding tribal membership within PRTPO. And the other piece that, because we were just talking about the letter of support policy, is to make sure that whatever that policy ended up being, because at that point we hadn't done this work yet, that if any changes were needed to the bylaws to affect or execute that new policy, that should be included as well. So and then the idea was that we would complete that work and then come back to you with what we think are the recommended changes to the bylaws. And then with your discussion and direction today, any other revisions or changes you would like to see made, we will then send that draft out for legal review. We use Lisa Nickel with Kitsap County to be our legal, we get legal services from them. We will send her the draft bylaws revisions as well as the letter of support policy for legal review before we bring it back to you in October. So the changes that are spelled out in here are just done in sort of standard strikeout format. And I apologize, I know it's kind of a confusing thing to read, but the tribal piece is the very first one under the membership, under section 2, and it's on page 1 of the bylaws piece. And what that did was it did nothing to change our process, no change whatsoever to the process, but the language was cleaned up, and just that those paragraphs were sort of structured a little differently and reorganized to make it very clear that if any of the other 5 tribes in the region want to become a voting member of PRTPO, all they have to do is execute the interlocal agreement. That is not subject to the chair coming to the board and asking the board, do you think that the Quinault Nation or the Suquamish tribe should be allowed to be a voting member? That by state law, they would become a voting member. So that's clarified, I think, a little bit better in the language here, and then everybody else has their process. And we sent that language out to our tribal partners just to make sure that addressed the questions that came up, and it did. The letter of support policy that you all just discussed is reflected under the duties of the officers and under executive board, which is number 3 in the bylaws, and under B of that is responsibilities of the officers. And the chair, there's an additional sentence added authorizing the chair in the bylaws to sign correspondence or other routine business matters on behalf of PRTPO as authorized by the executive board. So to Randy, to your point of making sure our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted to avoid any confusion in the future and build a better fence. The other changes in here that you'll see are mostly corrections to typos. I would just point out that the work group members felt that under the E of executive board quorum, that we could provide greater clarity by capitalizing certain words in there, just to be very specific that we were talking about cities as entities or counties as entities and not counties as geographic areas. And similarly, tribes, making sure that we're being respectful and capitalizing that. And then and that's also reflected in the quorum table at the very end of the bylaw. And then finally, under the TAC membership, when the bylaws were first drafted, they specified that the TAC members needed to be the sort of the official STIP representatives for their organizations. And it's not anything that we've ever contemplated or done or carried out, and doesn't seem to have a whole lot of relevance. The TAC is more than the RTIP and the STIP. So it was suggested that that be struck. So that's what you see in the strikeout version there, walking through that. And again, I would turn it back to you, to hear if there are any questions, or if anything's not clear, if we've overlooked anything. This would be a great time to bring that up. And as I said, I will send a clean version to Lisa to take a look at, and then bring that back to you in October.
Thank you, Sarah. Lindsay, you sat on that committee in most of the meetings. Do you have any comments or want to provide anything on the bylaw update?
I don't think I do, but thank you.
Okay. It seems pretty straightforward. What the language had been before under tribal membership is they were just included with anyone else seeking membership, and it needed board approval, when in fact the tribes do not need board approval. They just need to execute the ILA. So we made that a second section, which clarified that. Under the TAC membership, we have never made sure that the TAC members are in fact the STIP representatives. And we seem to get great participation, and we have no problem with communication. So that seems superfluous. And then our quorum does get a little bit confusing, and I think the capitalization, just some of the punctuation changes on that, clarified that. And then adding the sentence that allowed the chair with authorization of the board to sign routine business matters. I think it all just makes sense. So now would be the time to let us know if you would like to see any of that changed, or if you have anything else on the bylaws that you think need addressing. We do look at these every 2 years, so they'll come back for another review in 2025. Okay, I'm not seeing any discussion on that. No one's raising their hands. So with that, I am going to direct Sarah to go ahead and take the bylaws to our legal counsel for approval. And we all understand that the letter of support policy will also be going to our legal counsel for approval, and they will be coming back in October. So with that, moving on down, we're getting to the part of the meeting why everyone is here. So Sarah, do you want to introduce George and Kate?
Sure. Again, a little bit of background for everybody. At your next meeting, you are going to be asked to approve the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. And just the way the timing of this works, you will have to take action on it the same meeting that you see it for the first time. We have to comply with schedules, coordination with state and local. So the vast majority of the RTIP is made up of WSDOT projects. And so for the last several years, the board has invited WSDOT to come do a briefing in August before you see the RTIP, to talk about the kind of projects that you will see in the RTIP, the projects that you, not the kind of projects, the projects that you will see in the RTIP in October. And this has turned out to be a very informative occasion to hear about, in February, you hear from the regional administrator about big overarching policy direction or considerations, big organization-wide considerations for WSDOT. This is a time to get into some nitty-gritty detail about the projects specifically. And so today, George Mazur from Olympic Region and Kate Favre are going to walk us through this. My understanding is Kate is going to do the driving and George is going to do the talking. So Kate, you should be able to click on the green share screen button, probably at the bottom. And I'm going to turn that over to you too. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to hear that everyone's looking forward to it. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Looking good. Okay, so I'm going to start on kind of a big picture. You're going to see a lot fewer icons here than we discussed last year. So the program, the changes in the ads are smaller than last year. So just to clarify, this is not all the activity that's going on in PRTPO for the next few years. These are changes to the STIP. So it's a combination of projects where there's been a shift in the cost, a major cost increase, or adds to the project list. So there's three categories that were designated on here. Preservation projects, which are in the green circle. Improvement projects, or what we call Program I, which are the orange circles. And then fish passage projects, which, lo and behold, are the little fish icons there. So the big changes in the preservation program. So last year when I presented, we had 34 individual project ads on the preservation side, including a number of new paver projects. This year, there are 8 preservation projects spread around for construction in 24 and 25. There are no new paver projects at this point being added. And I think there's been talk that after the legislative session, the preservation program was substantially underfunded. This is the outcome of that, is projects have been deferred a bit into the out years, so we're not adding any new paver projects at this point for out year construction. So I said 8 preservation projects compared to 34 last year. That was a big number last year, but there was a real clustering of individual projects around the Hood Canal Bridge and a couple of other bridges around the area, bridge preservation projects. There are 14 improvement projects, again, which are the orange dots. 6 of those 14 are actually revisions and costs from last year. So such as the Belfair bypass has a new cost estimate. Last year, there were 10 improvement projects added or revised. And then this year, the fish passage, there are 17 fish passage projects on here, but that affect 50 individual fish passage sites or crossings. That's about the same number as last year. But once again, this is a mixture of new ads. It's mostly new ads, but some cost revisions overall. So that's kind of the big picture. It's a little bit smaller of a program than we discussed last year. There's going to be questions of, hey, what about certain things that got added in our legislative session? And the big one here would be, say, the Gorst project on SR3 and SR16 that has yet to be programmed. So this is an evolving list. The program constantly changes. This represents a snapshot in time, and it's a snapshot in time of what you'll be asked to act on. So over time, this some of the bigger projects you're expecting will be added to this, and individual phases will be added to this too, because this is again just major construction funding. So I wanted to pause there and see if there was any big picture question before we can start diving into some of these around the region. And I can't see all the hands. So
I was going to say, feel free to raise your hand and it'll move you up on my screen, I believe. I'm not seeing any hands raised yet.
And if anyone wants me to click on a certain project that you're seeing, there is some information tied to these. It's not just the location, right. So we can give you a better description of the project if you're interested in seeing that while we're here.
Okay.
Okay.
Not seeing any hand raised. Go ahead and keep going, George.
Okay, so we'll go on the preservation projects first. All of these are either a bridge deck or bridge painting project around the region. Most of these are kind of on the western part of the PRTPO area along SR 110, US 101, and SR 113. So 5 of the 8 projects are in that area with bridge deck and painting projects. And then there's, yeah, Kate, you're okay. And then 3 of the remaining ones are on kind of the central to west, US 101 and SR 104 have the remaining ones. Okay, the ads on the Fish Passage are mostly, hey, Kate, I don't know if you want to maybe provide a little bit more detail on the Fish Passage, since this is a topic near and dear to your heart. But most of those are from Port Angeles to the east in this ad round. I believe that's perhaps a little bit different than what we had last time, where it was a little bit more dispersed around. Is there anything you'd care to add on with the Fish Passage, Kate, or any you want to highlight?
Yeah, I might just highlight the ones that are active currently. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, the Coastal 29 Progressive Design build is currently in construction on the western side of the peninsula. The Fish Passages coming up, and some you'll see here, are the Whiskey Bundle. Those are 11 sites dispersed throughout SR 112. Also, our next big Progressive Design build bundle is the Kitsap County Progressive Design build. There's actually 29 sites. 9 of those are geographically clumped within one intersection, but those are kind of the 2 major Fish Passage projects that you'll be hearing from in the next couple years. Since they are large, they'll be dispersed construction, but you could expect construction in the 25, 26, and even into 27 years. I think those are the major highlights for Fish Passage here.
Okay, and then on the improvement projects.
Oh, George, one sec. I
Yes.
think I can only see half the screen, but I know Sarah looks like she has her hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Kate, you
Half the
said
screen
about
also.
the progressive, Coastal 29 progressive process.
Design build.
What is
Yep.
what is that?
Those are the sites that are currently being constructed in the Western Olympic Peninsula. I think there's 5 that are under construction currently. And those will be constructed throughout a couple of fish windows throughout this year, next year, and I believe even into 2025.
And was that
I don't have
just like, is that just sort of how they were grouped, or is it a different kind of a process? Or I'm not, the term hadn't.
Yeah, so progressive design build is a delivery method, and it's usually very large bundles. So Coastal 29 from the main 29 sites. Kitsap 29 actually started as Kitsap 21, and then we found some more barriers in the process that got lumped in. So both of our progressive design build bundles are 29 sites. Those are broken up once a progressive design builder is brought on board, which is QIT for Coastal 29. And actually very recently, about 2 weeks ago, QIT was awarded the Kitsap contract as well. QIT kind of puts those in mini bundles from 4 to 5 sites that are delivered together. So this summer, that first bundle is under construction. And they lead the design and the construction of those projects. And I don't have that list handy, but I can definitely send you over a map of the Coastal 29 sites and what the construction years are looking at right now.
And then Commissioner Rolfes.
Thank you. And I'd love to see the Kitsap 21. Is that what you called it?
It's Kitsap 29 now. It did start as
Nice.
Kitsap 21. I can definitely send that over. And another resource that I kind of had in my back pocket. Let's see here.
And then I had another question, Beck. That wasn't my original question.
I'll share this really quick and then we can jump to your question. So this is
gotcha.
a public map. It's our WSDOT Fish Passage Inventory map. If you Google WSDOT Fish Passage Inventory, it'll take you here. Like I said, it's public. And you can filter these sites by delivery, design, and construction year. So, and this is by site. So the map that I'm showing, sometimes it's by bundle. So if we have the Whiskey Bundle, for example, which is the SR 112 bundle, those are 11 sites shown as one dot. On this map, you can see each site individually. And for Kitsap, for instance, you can go to Kitsap, you can filter if you just wanted to see 21, 23, 23, 25, or 25, 27. Kitsap is 2325. So all of these sites in Kitsap County are within the Kitsap bundle, and you can click and it'll show you some information on that.
Okay.
And Kate, just to
But after-
clarify on this map, this is kind of the delivery plan. It's
Correct.
delivery's not kind of official till it's in the STIP. And
Totally.
sometimes complex projects come about and the delivery might shift a little bit.
Absolutely. A good example of that I might want to bring up is you might see Peabody Creek, which for those of you familiar with Port Angeles is the creek / culvert that runs under downtown Port Angeles. I think Lincoln Street is the main street that it runs under there. You will see some funds for that, but obviously that is a massively complex project that we are coordinating with on the city of Port Angeles that will very likely get pushed farther out. There's really no solution, no feasible solution for that yet. So just something I wanted to mention.
There's always a solution.
Yeah, it's
so
kind of yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a process question. So how does it work in terms of, and a reporter asked me this on Monday and I was like, I don't know. So I'm asking you all, what's the process? So on 305, for example, Murden Cove, I didn't know this until the reporter told me. There's a ambitious project on 305 at Murden Cove on the state highway, but just downstream from that is a city culvert that needs to be repaired in order for the stream to have no boundaries. And I just wonder, like, what's the process for making sure that the local government has the resources and the timing is right for them to do their part of the project too?
Yeah, so I think you said it was downstream of the state culvert. Do you know how far downstream?
No, I didn't even know it existed till.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that project either, actually. So I don't know.
I mean, I know the project. I didn't know the city culvert. And similarly, they raised the same concern about the other fish that's on 305.
Totally. And we run into
like
that problem.
Yeah.
We
So
run
what,
into that
what do you
problem.
do with that?
Yeah, we run into that problem and not a lot. It's not a unique situation because the fish passage program kind of has to follow the very strict rules that are laid out within the federal injunction. If we can repair the state-owned barrier without impacting adjacent barriers, we're kind of held to do so for funding purposes. However, we run into a lot, not so much with other adjacent like private or public owned barriers, but with railroad, especially because a lot of railroad culverts are either have a junction box or are incredibly close to our culverts. If hydraulically we can't replace our barrier without impacting, like I said, public, private, whatever, another barrier, we would either need to replace that, correct it, or make it forward compatible for the owner to do so, again, private or public. So like I said, I'm not familiar with that site, but if it's quite a ways downstream where we could correct our barrier without impacting that, the grading extent going, we would do so. And unfortunately, that has been the case where a couple where, you know, you have 3 miles of potential habitat gain that really replacing our barrier might only get you 100 feet of habitat gain because there is another barrier. But unfortunately, that's just kind of the parameters that we're held to. And we coordinate with all of our county and city partners. We have one in Bremerton right now, Ostrich Creek, that we're coordinating on, where some of you might be familiar with that. It's the one that they're having encampment issues with. That stream runs dry in the summer, and a large encampment has popped up within the Kitsap Way culvert. So I'm coordinating with Gunner on that project because likely ours will become very, very close. But luckily that was corrected by the county. So that will be a good example of 2 projects, one city-owned, one state-owned, that were right next to each other. They've corrected ours. When we correct ours, there will be no barriers for quite a while there.
Thank you. Nicole and then Lindsay.
Hi, this is Nicole with Jefferson Transit. And I'm curious a little bit about the fish passage barrier that's in West Jefferson County.
Mhm.
That one. And what's a good page for me to find more updated information about that project? Is there a particular page I should be going to? I know you've had a discussion with WashDOT last year, but
Yeah,
any help I can get as far as staying on top of that project?
totally. You can feel free to reach out to me. But if you're just wanting kind of the best guess on delivery dates, if you type in WashDOT Fish Passage, it'll take you to our main Fish Passage page, and headquarters, who manages the entire program, updates that list quarterly. So that will have the latest information on what sites are programmed, when they are programmed, what years they will be in either pre-design, design, or construction. The delivery method, so whether it's design build, design bid build, or progressive design build. This looks like it's a smaller bundle, so I would expect it to be design build or design bid build. Yeah, but if you have any other questions, totally feel free to reach out to me. And if I can't answer your question, I can get you to the right person.
Okay, because I think there had been talk about closing 101 for 2-week stretches at a time.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I'll try looking that up. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hey, Lindsay?
Yeah, I just want to go to this bigger picture of not being able to take a watershed-based approach to culvert removal. What we're talking about here is honoring tribal treaty rights. And the tribes in Washington state went to the federal courts and got a court order against the state of Washington to say that these fish barriers violated their treaty rights and needed to be removed. If we could go back in time, I think all the counties and all the cities should have joined that lawsuit as defendants to say, us too. Because what we're dealing with now is the state is funding culvert removal for state-owned culverts, because those are the ones bound to the injunction, as Kate explained. But we all know that we have city-owned or county-owned or privately owned culverts upstream or downstream of state highways or state roads. And it doesn't make sense from the perspective of restoring fish habitat to only remove the state culvert when you have another culvert upstream or downstream. So it makes total sense that WashDOT is working to follow the federal injunction order. But what do we do to actually achieve the goal here, which is to honor our treaty rights by maintaining the fish? So, like, do we have estimates of what it would cost to get, to do all the other culverts? Or are there other strategies we could employ to try to restore more miles of fish habitat rather than just focusing on the state-owned culverts, recognizing that this is a challenge. There are many other causes to fish population decline, but habitat is essential. The other thing I'd say is City of Port Angeles, we're working with Lower Oaklalam Tribe, trying to access NOAA, Inflation Reduction Act funding to remove our fish barriers on the other creeks in Port Angeles. We have a number of small creeks that flow into the Strait of Juan de Fuca in Port Angeles. So there's other funding out there, I think specifically through NOAA and IRA, for other counties and cities to work on this issue. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay.
Kate, I'm going to take this one quick, and you can jump in too. And
Okay.
just, Lindsay, hear everything you say. Recognize, you're talking to the project delivery people here, and we have a particular focus on, meeting our needs and what we've been directed to do. And I won't even say we're a couple orders removed from the decision makers who dealt with what you did. We're dozens of orders removed from all the lawyers and politicians who came to that decision. So agree that a broader approach would have been better. We're stuck with what we have today in delivering individual projects and kind of talking about how those are going to roll out over time. And in retrospect, with hindsight being 2020, a different approach probably would have been more optimal. And Kate, I don't know if you want to deal with anything more specific than that.
Yeah, so George gave you the realism. I'll give you some optimism to go with that. There is so much we can do. So something I didn't mention is I'm right now leading our fish passage pre-design team. So when we start scoping and pre-design on these projects, we have a lot of coordination with our co-managers, who are the tribes and Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the localities and private property owners who own culverts on upstream or downstream side. There's so much we can do with the county and localities, but specifically for private culvert owners, say a driveway culvert, a private road culvert, whatever it may be, we've been directing them to our Department of Fish and Wildlife partners, who I'm forgetting the name of the program, but there's a program that's funded by Department of Fish and Wildlife where private culvert owners can apply for funding to help correct their barriers. So like Lindsay mentioned, there are programs out there to explore funding. And I promise you that we are encouraging all of our partners to explore that funding, because like you said, there's just so many culverts upstream and downstream. And if we were held to open all of that potential habitat gain, I mean, it's in the billions and billions of dollars, because a lot of these culverts aren't, they're not close to, Hood Canal, the ocean, whatever it may be. Some of these are pretty far upstream from when they reach salt water. So and there, I'm happy to answer as many questions. I'm not sure how much time we had, so please tell me to shut up if the time comes.
Yeah. Do we want to go on really quickly, Thera, and back to the improvement projects?
Yes.
I don't know if there's any more
We have
questions.
time. Yeah, you've
Okay.
still got some time on the agenda.
Okay.
Great. So on the improvement projects I mentioned before, there are 14 improvement projects. 9 of the 14 are actually intersection upgrades of one form or another, including 6 roundabouts. So if you were to start kind of just north of Shelton there are 2 roundabout projects coming up there at Agate and Pickering. And then moving a little bit further north is the Belfair bypass project, the revised cost on that. And then further north, as you get into Gorst, is a roundabout project at Division. Kind of that last one. Nope, further south, just south from there. Nope, one more down. There you go. That's the Division roundabout there. And then there are, just to the right of there, 2 other roundabout projects on SR 160 and 166 that are coming in. And then we pull back. Going north on SR 3, there is a stormwater retrofit project. And then the remaining ones in the area, there's a variable message sign around Hood Canal Bridge, shoreline stabilization around SR 16 to the south. And there's a region-wide signal rebuild project, rebuild and rehab. So the big ticket item on this is a cost increase on the Belfair bypass. And as I mentioned, when I started this, the major Gorst project, none of that, as of the time that this information was pulled, none of that had been programmed, and that's kind of still in the process of being programmed, and will probably be handled through an amendment process throughout the year. So that's the 14 improvement projects here, kind of everything on the eastern side of the region. And that is our projects we'll be bringing for your RTIP approval. Again, a much smaller list than we saw last year, a lot of cost increases, very, very few new additions to the project list, quite honestly, beyond roundabouts and signal upgrades. Thera?
Yeah, I'm wondering, so I'm starting to put together some GIS stuff for PRTPO. Is this map out on the WashDOT site, or is this an internal map? I'd like to, after today's meeting, send to everybody a link to the fish passage map and your contact information, Kate, and maybe even the fish and wildlife information, just so our members, they're the ones who are going to be working with constituents out there. Is this information also out on the website, or is this what's going to be in our regional tip map after the RTIP is developed? Is that? I'd love this information to be available.
Yeah, so this is internal. This was just for this presentation purposes. I am going to send the shape files to Ed as I usually do each year. And he can maybe make that available to everyone. I could send you a static version of this. And like I said, that fish passage map that I showed is public. I was saying a little bit earlier before the meeting got started, in order for me to share this with people, I have to go through a pretty substantial metadata and go through all of our statewide GIS policies in order to share it with everyone, which I'm sure you can imagine is a long, lengthy process.
It is. Although I will say, Kate, you all have, WashDOT has put a lot of effort into its GIS platform. And
Absolutely.
it's really gotten much better just in the last couple of years. I might even say like year or two. It has really come a long way. So thank you for all the effort that you're doing and others on your end to make information like this accessible to people outside of WashDOT.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, George and Kate, we thank you very much for your presentation this morning. And Thera will be getting with you to see exactly what we can add to our website to make it convenient for our members to access the information. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beck.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks, guys. And moving on down the agenda, Thera, do you want to go over the draft public participation plan? This, I believe, is also a first reading.
Yes, thank you. This is a first reading. This item and the next item are focused on the regional transportation plan, the update of which officially got underway July 1st. The PRTPO has a public sort of overarching public participation policy that says, as an organization, we're going to do what we can to make our information accessible to the public and talk in clear language and all that. But it also says that PRTPO does a couple of things that are probably of particular interest to the public. And for those things, we will develop a specific public participation plan for those activities. And one of those activities is update of the regional transportation plan. And so this is what you have before you is the draft public participation plan for this RTP update. And I'm not going to go through it all super in detail, but just some highlights I would hit is first, as we discussed back in the spring, I mean, we are doing this update on a teeny tiny shoestring. The legislature does not fund RTPOs fully, and so we have to operate within the resources that we have. So this public participation plan envisions that all of our outreach will be done virtually using online tools, and we will do our best to make it interesting and engaging. But I think we can also say from the last 3 years of experience, we have found that more and more with all of Ed's work to get broadband out there into the region, we're finding actually that we get broader participation actually through online processes than we have in the past, and certainly much more cost effectively. So this public participation plan envisions virtual engagement. I also want to call out, it has two different sort of angles to it. I refer to them as outreach to the general public. So, and we'll ask for input based on the feedback that we got in the spring. We're envisioning two sort of opportunities for outreach, primary opportunities for outreach. One will be about this time next year when we're going out with some draft vision and goals and big issues that over the next few meetings you all are going to flesh out. What do we think the big issues are that this plan needs to highlight with the public? And we'll go out and test those ideas with the community and make sure we haven't overlooked some big issues, make sure that the way we're talking about this makes sense. And then the second, and then the second big opportunity for public engagement would be when we have a draft plan and draft strategies, that engagement that we would do before asking the public to weigh in and comment in a formal public hearing. So those are our two primary opportunities, plus just what we maintain on our website. The second big component of this public participation plan, though, that I would like to call your attention to is what I call in-reach strategies. So outreach to the general public, in-reach to you and your organizations, your staff, and your colleagues. We know that meeting every other month with you and also with the TAC, with a lot of other things on your agenda, only affords us so much opportunity to make sure that we have the right, coordination and consistency between what we're trying to do at the regional level and what each of you are doing, each of our 27 members are doing at your levels. And in-reach is what we'll be doing, that sort of, I might be setting up meetings, maybe with the transit providers or the tribes. I might be sitting down virtually with, with Steve to better understand what's going on in Clallam County about some issues. It'll be that type of activity that is just what we'll need to fill in some of the pieces for what we can pull off within the framework that you have here. So I wanted to point that out to you, that as your staff on this, I see you and your organizations as part of our public that we need to engage as well, in addition to the general public. So happy to answer any questions about that. But it's a simple plan. We don't have a lot of resources. We try to do the best that we can with the resources that we do have. I want to say, if the legislature wants flashier engagement, we would happily take some more funding for planning. But as it is, I think we'll be able to get meaningful input. And the other thing I would call out as well is that the other engagement, the other planning process where we really work to get feedback from the community is our Human Services Transportation Plan, which was just adopted, was it last year? Last year? I lose track of time, I think last year. And we will tap the information that we got from that process as well. Anything out of that that's relevant to this, we're going to work to sort of bring that together. The people who participated in that process had good insights and ideas and feedback on the transportation needs of the most vulnerable people in the region. And I can't think of a better way to make sure that we don't overlook those needs in this process than to draw from the insights that we got from the Human Services Transportation Plan a year ago. So I'm happy to answer if you have any real specific questions that I can answer. I'd be happy to do that and get any feedback or discussion from you, make any changes that we need to, and then I will bring it back to you for approval in October. And Beck, I'll turn that back over to you.
Yes. Are there any questions or comments or discussion on the RTP's public participation plan? I'm not seeing any, so with that.
Beck, this is George. I'm sorry, I couldn't find my raise hand on
Okay.
Zoom. I'm a Teams person. A quick question for Sarah. I'm going to ask my team to look over this. Do you have a deadline by which you'd like us to provide any feedback on this?
Well, certainly before October.
Oh, easy enough. Okay.
I mean, if possible by mid-September, if anything significant might change, I'd love to be able to talk about it with the TAC. I would say we took this to the TAC for discussion in July, and they didn't have any changes to make. So yes, if you have anything that you would like to see changed, if possible by the time the TAC meets in September, that would be really helpful.
And I think that's the third Thursday.
Yeah, it'll be September 21st is the TAC meeting. So yeah.
Okay. With that, we'll move right on down to the next item, which is the history and requirements of the RTP and the update we're doing. There, I think you're taking this again, are you not?
Oh, you're going to be so tired of me talking about the RTP within 2 years. Yes, I will be taking this. So this is your first, as a board, this is your first sort of discussion. You've talked about the RTP before now, but it's been more about how are we going to structure the update, the process for integrating that into the work program. this is really the kickoff discussion for you. And based on the questions that came up in the earlier discussions, just as we were scoping this, there were there was clearly interest in understanding how we got here and the process that we're in before diving right into this. And so I am going to, and I tried to rearrange my screen today, but probably not well advised on that. I'm going to, I do have a short presentation to share with you. And, oh, this was a terrible idea. Excuse me, one second. I can get you all out of there. Cancel. Don't share that. I don't think you want to see me sharing you all. Let's try this again. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just walk through with you. Hopefully you've got this presentation up on your screen now. I'm just going to spend a few minutes walking through with you what we're doing and why, what are the requirements that we have to do, what the background is on this. This is, we're not starting from scratch. This is not PRTPO's first RTP, but understanding what we've done in the past, I think will be helpful in thinking about what we're looking at going forwards. And then talk about that. What are we maybe going to be looking at over the next few months as we put this together? What you see here is the schedule that we're on, and we went through this in more detail back in June. I'm not going to go through this, but we have a whole variety of task areas that we will be working on over these next 2 years. We're just at the very, very earliest stages of this right now. You can see down here, community engagement. This is where we're talking about the public participation plan and all that. And we're really, today's discussion is sort of the context, the background for the planning framework, and sort of who we are as a region. What makes our plan different than anybody else's plan? Before I'm going to take us on the Wayback Time machine, because I think to talk about what the requirements are for the RTP and to understand those requirements and what the opportunities are for this update, it's important to remind ourselves where this requirement even came from. And to do that, we even have to talk about where did RTPOs come from? And it all came out of the growth management legislation back in 1990. And so today, the things that we take for granted, that transportation and land use have an inherent relationship with each other, that we need to be, when we talk about transportation, we're talking about all modes of transportation, not just highways and congestion during rush hour. All of that stems from the work that was done on the Growth Management Act back in 1990. And if you flip through that original legislation, about 35 pages, you come to where the RTPOs were very first mentioned. And I find this really interesting and really illuminating about how far we have come in the last 30 years. Because in 1990, the legislature was finding that, like we were saying for the very first time, that the transportation system is owned, built, maintained, operated by a lot of different entities. But for the very first time, we were saying that all of those system components need to function in a coordinated way as one interconnected system. That was a novel idea back then. They also said, for the very first time, they said local jurisdictions and WSDOT need to work together on transportation, and that it is in the state's interest for this to happen, and they created a regional forum by which this could happen. In 1990, this group did not exist. You all did not exist. And WSDOT and local jurisdictions were not sitting down at the table together. Local jurisdictions were not talking to each other like they do today about growth and coordination and mobility. So it's really important when we look at the RTPO requirements to understand this is the genesis of them. This is where it all got started. And all of those pages in the growth management legislation about RTPOs are found now in RCW 4780. And if you ever want to go through this in detail, we can. I think you did a lot of this when you were reconstituting as an independent organization in the transition. What we're going to focus on is just this bit about the regional transportation plan. It's a little awkward because it really does relate to everything else that the RTPOs do, but that's what we're going to focus on here. The RCW, in good RCW language, spells out what we have to do. The RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, must do a lot of things that it's been doing since 1990. It must define what the regional transportation system is. What do we mean by that? It must establish level of service for the regional system, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. It has to define what the goals and objectives are and provide information that helps the members of the RTPO to identify issues to be addressed and strategies that can improve the system. It must demonstrate that it's financially feasible. If PRTPO wanted to say we're going to build a light rail system or a rapid transit, a high-speed rail, commuter rail from Port Angeles to Bremerton, that wouldn't pass muster. That's not financially feasible. It really specified that before you make the system bigger, let's preserve and make the existing system as efficient as we can. It proposes a regional investment program, which sounds an awful lot like a regional transportation improvement program, to guide system development. And we will later in this process, we'll talk more about this consistency, but the regional transportation plan must be consistent with local comprehensive plans, and it must be consistent with statewide transportation policy. The regional plans that we have in place, all the ones that have been done before now, all meet these requirements. I did want to come back and mention a little bit more about level of service. Level of service, I think you all are familiar with this concept. Certainly in 1990, it was a pretty new idea to be talking about this. RTPOs get to establish level of service. Especially back then, they were thinking about congestion only for the regional transportation system, except for those parts of it that are declared highways of statewide significance. And those are set by the highways of statewide significance are designated by the legislature, and the level of service is established on those facilities by WashDOT. So, and in our region, that includes 101, 20, 19, the ferries, 104. Most of our state highway system, most of it, not all of it, but most of our state highway system in the Peninsula region is designated highways of statewide significance because they're either providing essential statewide regional mobility or connecting to major commerce, like ports are considered essential to the state. And so we have some local routes that sort of are smaller state routes that fall into that. The first plan that PRTPO adopted was in 1995. And in fact, 30 years ago, probably right about now, they started that process of developing the very first plan. But that plan really served the region for a long time. The next plan came along in 2015. And then in 2019, PRTPO adopted its most recent update. Every one of those plans was a bit different and spoke to what the issues were at the time. And so what I'm going to do is just take a couple of minutes to walk through those highlights, what made those plans unique for their time. Again, as background for what will make our plan unique for the time going forward. So in 1995, that was, again, we were still, as a state, we were still putting transportation and land use together in the same sentence for the first time. So local jurisdictions had not yet, most of them had not yet adopted their comprehensive plans. The very first regional transportation plan provided guidance and a framework that then went on to inform the development of those comprehensive plans, this consistency thing. The regional plan needs to be consistent with the local plans, which need to be consistent with the regional plan. It's sort of a built-in checks and balance. The forecast horizon then was 2010. So, we've definitely passed a long ways our very first planning horizon. Some of the things that jumped out at me as I looked through the plan is that for the very first time, we as a region were very specific in saying the marine highway system is a very important part of our regional transportation system. Prior to that, we kind of thought of, we were really not we as PRTPO, but as a planning community, I would say, we were very interested in surface transportation, and PRTPO at that time said it's not just surface transportation. I mean, the marine highway system is just integral to who we are and what we do. It also was the very first time, it's interesting to go back and read that. They were trying to explain what we meant by a multimodal transportation system and how do we think about multimodalism. Again, today we can't think about transportation without thinking that way, but that was a new idea then. The emphasis at the time was on congestion. The Growth Management Act was driven in large part by rampant uncontrolled growth in central Puget Sound that was sprawling up and down the I-5 corridor. The legislation applies statewide, and so even though they were doing a plan for a highly rural region, congestion was the big focus at the time because that's the way the legislation was written. So a lot of focus on congestion, promoting concurrency, which is in the Growth Management Act, which says if you don't have the facilities in place at the time to accommodate growth without your level of service deteriorating, you have to sort of slow that growth down until the facilities are in place. And then something else that really jumped out at me as I was looking through the plan was there was a lot of emphasis on tourism corridors, and they were described that way in the 95 plan, recognizing that tourism was a vitally important part of this region's economy, its character. People come here to take advantage of the natural resources and recreational opportunities, and that was very clearly pointed out in that original plan. That plan, PRTPO lived with that plan for a long time. That plan was updated, the update began in 2011 and was concluded in 2015. It pushed the planning horizon out to 2035. What I found significant in looking at that, and Beck and Dick were both part of that planning process, and I think Stephanie Lilly from Kitsap Transit at the time were part of that planning process. It was led in large part by the Technical Advisory Committee. The TAC created a subcommittee that met every other month for years to develop this plan. And then I think it was actually the Skokomish tribe, staff from the Skokomish tribe stepped forward and carried the final plan development over the finish line for PRTPO. This plan was, now it had moved on. We had done the startup for the GMA, and now this plan was really focusing on, it was the first time they really sort of articulated some big issues that are outside of the control of any one member, but that are going to affect mobility in the region in the future. And they spoke very in depth about climate change, fish passage barriers, the implications for a region when so much of its population is aging in place in a highly rural region. At that time, they built a travel demand model to do congestion analysis. We're not doing one of those now, but that was a big part of what they did. It was the first time I saw active transportation as a term pop up in one of our regional plans, and so there was a lot more emphasis on non-motorized travel. And Leslie, I want you to note that in the 2015 plan, there was a discussion. There wasn't a project. Again, the plan did not have projects in it, but there was a discussion about completing a trail from the Kingston Ferry Terminal to La Push. And so it talked about that there would be some on-road elements to it and off-road elements, and some owned by different entities, and it might tie in with local comprehensive plans. So it's first reference I found to that, which I thought you wanted to call that to your attention. It had lots of goals and policies and guiding principles and objectives, a lot. This plan, more so than the first one, really promoted safety and preservation and reliability. It's like this plan was starting to become more of a rural plan instead of just adhering strictly to this notion of congestion as the driving factor behind the planning process. And as I said, they did not include any project list at all in that plan. They felt that and they spoke to this up front, that the best understanding of specific project need is going to come from local and state agencies, not at the regional level. That is not the appropriate place to try to define a long range list of project needs. And so they pointed back to the local processes for identifying those plans. And so that plan, PRTPO lived with that plan for a few years. And then during probably just about the time just before the transition got underway, an update of that plan got underway. And I can't tell exactly if it started in 2017 or 2018, but this was the new 2040 planning horizon. This was adopted by PRTPO very, very shortly after the transition was complete. In the ensuing years, it had PRTPO had conducted a non-motorized connectivity study. And so this, the current plan, this is our current plan, referenced that and spoke further to coordination for trail planning efforts and other measures to increase the viability of active transportation for more people. The other thing, this plan, to be fair, it was developed by WSDOT. WSDOT was the lead agency at the time, but it includes a lot of strategies that had come up out of various WSDOT planning processes that were included as things worth paying attention to and that we should, we'd be supporting going forwards. They're not projects, but more strategies. So starting to really advance this idea of strategic plans. It also included, and I think this makes a lot of sense, and I've already talked to George about this for the next, for the one we're working on now, it included a state facilities action plan, because so much of the region's regional transportation system is owned and operated by the state. So this was an important way of allowing that level of detail into a part of the plan that would have maybe not fit in so well elsewhere. And then, and again, this was the plan that during the public process, we heard that it didn't speak to climate change, it didn't speak to electric vehicles. So that ended up basically the board as it exists today, put together and included in it some follow-up steps where he said, these are things that we're going to try to address as we can within our work program. And so it really made that linkage between the long-range regional plan and the day-to-day work program that PRTPO operates. So that's a really quick thumbnail sketch of sort of the history of planning, which brings us to today, where we are now in a position where we're going to be updating this plan again. I'm suggesting that we pick 2050 as a planning horizon. There's nothing, set in state law about how far to put it out, but 2050 is a nice round number to work with. The future is maybe more uncertain than it's ever been, both in terms of risks and threats, as well as opportunities and things that technology is changing that opens up possibilities that couldn't even be envisioned, even 10 years ago, much less 30 years ago when PRTPO first started doing long-range planning. So what we're going to be doing over these next few months with you to get ready for this time next year when we go to the public is talking about assessing what are some of those big issues that, in fact, I was just making notes, fish passage, maybe one of the things that the RTP will want to point out, won't necessarily have answers to it, but can point to the need for a more coordinated strategy for dealing with fish passage barriers so that we are maximizing the investment that the state is making in fixing the injunction barriers by correcting deficiencies upstream and downstream from there. That's an example of kind of a big gnarly issue that we don't have to have the answer to it, but what we can do is use this platform to point to this, and in the little tiny incremental ways that PRTPO can start focusing more and more attention on this. If this is a place to identify issues that if it doesn't come up at this table, I'm not sure whose table it would come up at. These are issues that transcend any one municipality or member, and really need attention in order to be responsible and think about the long range system in a responsible way. So we're going to do this over the next few months, but this background helped us, I hope, to get there. The last slide, and then I'll clear this out, just to give you a sense of what's coming up next, and I'll try to do this every month, is, I probably should have ordered this differently, but the next time you all come together, you're gonna go back and revisit our vision and our objectives of the regional plan and make sure that they're still valid and current. Do they need to be updated, or are we good? And at the same time, next month, the TAC is going to be going back and revalidating and updating just what do we mean by the regional transportation system? Do we have the right elements? Are we looking at the right data and forecasting needs for that system? Given what this is, it is a long-range regional policy plan. It is not to replace what a local or state agency does, or tribal entity. The boots on the ground, you all have the best ideas and best understanding of what the immediate need is in the implementation, but are we looking at this the right way going forward, given the uncertainties that we have today? So I'm going to stop that and then just turn it back over to you, back for discussion, questions, ideas, insights. This was really just a chance to get your wheels turning about where have we been in the past, and what that might mean for where we go in the future.
Okay, Ed has his hand up.
Sarah, can you admit Ted Jackson? I'm unable to do that. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you. And then keep going back. I can't.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions regarding the history and the requirements of our RTP? I think, I don't, Leslie, go right ahead.
I'll jump in. So thank you, Farah, for that. I really enjoyed the look back. One thing I'm wondering about, since this is a regional plan, and as you say, it does not supersede, any local plans and all that, could we be a little bit more descriptive, have some narrative about what it means to be collaborative across jurisdictions? Maybe with some examples or something like that. I just think that that's the richness and opportunity of, of this particular organization.
It is, and if to go back to when we first started, what we today get to rely on are like joint, countywide planning policies that each of our counties have adopted in collaboration with their members. So we will look to those to make sure that what we're doing is consistent with that. So we're almost hardwired for consistency. What we want to do with this plan, though, is what does that mean going forward? So we don't have to keep going back and rehashing, concentrate growth in urban areas, keep rural areas rural. We don't have to keep saying that. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And the way our work plan is set out, you all will be talking about consistency and what does that mean? What does that look like? But that conversation is going to start at the technical advisory committee, and we're going to put them in that role of, because they're the ones down there in the trenches a lot of times at the staff level, working to comply with those coordination requirements. And so working with them to identify what that means. the trail planning project is a great example of something where everybody's going to have their bit to play in that, their part to play. And it's a regional project that's going to be implemented by local jurisdictions that if it's implemented right, they'll all fit together, they'll plug in, and we'll have the ability to get from the Kingston Ferry Terminal to La Push, you know, in a, you know, on a coordinated facilities. So that is going to be a part of what we're looking at going forward is what does that mean? Because I think, and please push back if you all disagree with this, but from my vantage point as your staffer is that we've got the GMA stuff down. You all will be updating your comprehensive plans. You will be doing your own internal coordination with your local partners, with your neighbors through that process. And that's through our inReach, we'll tap into that. But we'll be looking for what does that look like going forwards. I don't want to presuppose what you all will think is important and what the TAC will think is important, but I think the trail planning effort, you know, where everybody's kind of got their piece of that. PRTPO won't do the plan. You all are going to do it. But by coming around the same table and working with each other, it'll make sure that the pieces fit together as it implements. Does that sort of get at what you were thinking about or you know, questions that you had? Okay. Thank you.
You know, one of my goals for this plan is that is user-friendly and that is not something that just sits on a shelf. Because in the past, our plans were really difficult. I shouldn't say difficult, but they were cumbersome documents for us to read and actually take actions or have extremely useful information for all of us. So I'm hoping that our plan will develop much as we saw from Kate and George's presentation today, where there will really be useful information that all of our jurisdictions can use, and we can see the coordination rather than it just in a manual. Anyway, that's what I hope that we can accomplish over the next couple of years. With that, is there anyone else that has any comments? Okay, Marty.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that think there that was really interesting looking back 30 years like that and seeing that, you know, we had RTP back then and where it's come today. And I think that everything we're having the PRTPO, you know, has worked out really great, especially with transit. You know, transit, everybody working together and having routes that can pretty much go anywhere on the peninsula. And it was real funny. I got a box of magazines that have pretty much everything we're talking about today. I don't know where they came from. I don't know who sent them to me, but I was looking through it. It had fish passages and the projects that was talking about. It's all in this magazine. I don't even know who sent it to me.
Well.
But yeah, this was a great meeting today. So thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Ted, now that we got you in the meeting.
Yeah, well, it's been a struggle this morning. Southern Oregon does not have the internet service that I anticipated, but I think as a WSU fan, I think that Doug's had something to do with it. But I just want to say thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I actually had to walk around the room and think about some of the things you said. That was great. Thank you. As somebody that's still trying to learn, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, terrific. Good. Thank you.
Perfect. With that, we will move on down to our next item, which is our transportation outlook for our meetings that we have typically every fall with our legislative delegations. Thera, I think this is you again. Are you, did you get a drink of water and are ready to keep going?
I'm ready. I can't drink too much water till the meeting's over.
Okay.
Yeah, this is this for those of you who've been on the board for a while. This is going to seem familiar to you. For those of you who are fairly new to the board, every year at this time, PRTPO puts together a information folio for its legislators. And later this year, we will, as Beck said, we will try to arrange a meeting with certain of our legislative delegation to share this with them. We're in the process right now of developing this, though, and we call it Transportation Outlook. It's a legislative folio. We it's sort of developed a bit of a standard format over the last 4 years that we've been doing it since the transition. And what this does is spells out a very small number of important topics that the executive board wants to bring to the attention of the legislature and of course any of our members and the general public. It's sort of what's top of mind going into this next year. So we were just talking about looking 30 years into the future. Now we're going to be talking about what are we looking at in this next year. And so every year we convene a work group to help with that. And that work group met earlier in July to provide direction on this. And what you have in your agenda packet is just sort of a recap of what that session looked like, and then sort of some really, I mean, very, very, very rough mock-up of the sort of the elements of this folio. And so again, our standardized format, and my understanding going into this next year is that we're going to stay with the same standard format. We've got so much other stuff on our plate right now, but that there'd be a cover letter, a two-sided cover letter on the front, at the top, that will have major messages on page 1 and other things to not forget about on page 2, and then it will have a project list. The major message on page 1, as came forward out of the work group, is that first of all, to reiterate that we have not taken our eyes off of the funding commitments that have already been made for Connecting Washington and Move Ahead Washington, and that we don't want the legislature to take their eyes off the ball either. That we still have some projects and funding commitments, even dating back to 2015, I think is when Connecting Washington came out. So in particular, the SR3 freight corridor in Belfair is a big one that has just barely gotten started, and that we want to make sure they don't forget. Then the second big message on page 1 is that safety is a priority concern, and that we need money for safety projects. And we can talk about that just a little bit more. And then on page 2, there's several sort of smaller, they would be presented as smaller issues having to do with reliability of the Hood Canal Bridge operations, and suggesting that maybe it's time to go back and, for Washington State to coordinate with the Coast Guard in terms of what are the terms by which we will open, by which that bridge will open. And in fact, when we had the discussion, Mike French was on the work group, and he said just, the previous couple of weeks on Friday, on a 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in July, the bridge opened to let one sailboat go through. So what is the economic impact of that? And does that policy need to be revisited? And then other things, we would say to them that we appreciate their support for the federal funding flexibility, but boy, we were kind of hoping it would last a little longer and be a little more efficient for our local partners to participate in. This was a success last year that we'd want to highlight, but ask them to think about a little harder. We would also, in this, we would bring to their attention that the region's partners were successful in obtaining a raised grant to do this coordinated trail planning effort. Bring that to their attention, and also to remind them that we appreciate the funding support for EV infrastructure in rural areas, and that these investments are really, really important to eliminate range anxiety in this area. The members felt that we had not, as a board, had not discussed enough about equity or zero emissions vehicles. Those terms, maybe stay away from that for this go round until the board has had time to develop its own language regarding that. But and then And then the project list, what was suggested was that we continue to do the project list, but provide less information on the project, on each project. So don't get into, get rid of the checklist of, this project does safety and multimodal and it's a Connecting Washington project. Get rid of all of that, make the font a lot larger, and again, keep the concise description, but remove some of that extra information. And then the question I'm sort of looking for feedback from you all is, some of the questions I'm looking for feedback from you all is, are these the right messages? And then in particular for safety, I was trying to think through, well, what do we do? What does that mean? How do we, there was discussion about giving them an example, being very specific. And I'm not exactly sure what that would be. What I proposed in the staff memo is maybe there's a graphic that shows, that we've, and it's not just this region, everywhere has lost ground in the last few years as far as safety goes. That we're starting to see our crash rates go up. It just happened during the pandemic, and also show how that corresponds to fatality rates. So I put that out there. I'm looking to get feedback on that, but mostly what I'm really looking for from you all is, in addition to that, is are these the right kinds of messages to include in here? And what do we think about tone? You saw I included as an attachment just screenshots of each of the sort of the major messages over the years. You could see the tone varies from year to year. Some years it was sort of fawning, other years it was sort of being assertive. I'm not sure what the board's pleasure is this year going forward, how we want to approach that. So that's what I'll be listening for in your discussion today. And Beck, I'm going to turn it back over to you for that discussion.
Randy's got his hand up. Randy?
Yeah, first, my apologies. I was not able to make that other meeting. I thought I would, but no matter where I went, I couldn't find the bars to be able to attend it. I kept trying. But with that, the meeting before that, I had brought up about the safety issue, but it was for a different purpose. Just after meeting with the Secretary of Transportation and seeing where he was, it seemed like a smart idea to take advantage of their desire to go for safety. And that's why the idea was a project, but we chose not to do that. I'm not sure how we can present safety if we're not looking to do a project. It's going to be a lot harder just to do it as a blanket, especially on an informational piece. But I appreciate all the work everybody did on it. And again, I apologize for not being able to be there on that meeting to clarify that, what I was hoping to see. Thank you.
Is there anyone else with comments who was on any of the meetings? I think one thing that I have heard, and this is just, water cooler type conversation, is that there's not going to be a transportation package this session. So funding is probably not necessarily what we would want as our high priority. So is there any comments about having safety? Amy?
It's not a comment about having safety, but I just wanted to make a note that on your major message, number 1, that we can remove the MTA park and ride facilities. Just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to comment? Are these, because we're talking now that the primary message or a focus, message 1, is not lose sight of the funding we've already received through either Connecting Washington or Moving Forward Washington, so that those move forward. We know some of them have been extended out quite a ways, but we also know that many of them are moving forward. Ed?
Thank you, Beck. Sarah, do we want to consider with the 1.3 billion coming to state broadband office in 24 and 25, putting in on some of that money for broadband as a group or individually as a transportation modality alternative?
I put that back to the group. I mean, it's this is really what you all want to line up behind. So if, and to Randy's earlier point, and Beck, I mean, the group hasn't ever in the past has not selected a project to line up behind. I think you're talking more about a programmatic, making sure that we don't lose sight of broadband as a funding priority. Yeah, and that can be, I mean, I put it to the group. Is that something, we can include that as a secondary message, or if we want to have something funding on the front page?
Well, I look at the raised grant process, and Lindsay can back me up in Port Angeles. That was a cooperative from Bainbridge Island. Thank you, Leslie, all the way through. Paulsbo was late to the party, but we made it and we acted with unity. I would think there might be an opportunity for discussion. There'll never be more money available to the state through the federal government than the next 2-year period. And we could really look at something along the raised grant model, but do it in a broadband modality.
I'm going to jump in on that, and that's not the role of the RTPO. We could convene a meeting among our jurisdictions if they want to take it on, but we don't. The RTPO is not going to manage a grant or solicit funds. Our individual members are, and we can support that. And like I said, we can convene a meeting of that group to get together, but that's not our role.
Could it be our role, a la the MPO like PSRC or the one in South Central Washington?
We don't handle money yet. We don't. What is different between us, and let's just say, because you're used to PSRC divvies their money out, their STB, their standard transportation dollars, they hand that out to the counties and regionally. In our organization, all of that money flows direct to the counties. None of it flows through the RTPO. We have no influence on that whatsoever. Our influence on that has been asking for the swap between federal money and state money, because federal money is so hard to use. But we don't, the only money we have any influence on at all is the TAP money, the transportation alternatives, and it amounts to about $215,000 a year. It's not a big amount of money. We also participate in the consolidated grant program in so much as we prioritize the applicants coming through our region as A, B, or C projects. And then that goes on to the state for further consideration. We don't, none of the money passes through us. So us as a group asking for money as the RTPO, that's just out of our realm. But our members getting together and asking for something, that's completely different. And Lindsay, you have your hand up.
I was just thinking about what this document is and what it isn't. We started this process a few years ago. I don't know how long we were doing it. And we're really getting maybe about half of our district representatives, our state legislators, meeting with us, giving us between 15 minutes and an hour of their time once a year. I don't know if they read the document. Probably the fewer words on it, the more likely they'll read it. And we're trying to influence how they think about priorities for regional transportation planning here on the Olympic Peninsula and Kitsap Peninsula. So within that context, the framework of safety, as part of that process, coming up with, hey, this is, a theme we want to emphasize, seems appropriate now. As Beck said, there doesn't seem to be much of an appetite for more transportation funding. I heard it directly from one of our 24th legislative district representatives that he's not interested in more transportation funding. Transportation's been funded, check. So, how do we continue to emphasize the continued need that we know we have? I beat the barrel on deferred maintenance all the time, and nobody wants to talk about that. So safety seems like a good way to say, hey, this is part of a conversation the legislature is having about traffic safety. There's a whole other conversation about vehicle thefts, and for folks who follow the legislature, that's a huge topic of conversation, mostly around public safety and policing and rules. But this kind of dovetails with conversations they're already going to be having in 2024. And it brings in this lens that says, we can do things to solve the, injuries and deaths on roads and streets. And we have solutions within transportation planning. So we're blending into a conversation that is ongoing at the legislature in a way that might help to produce better outcomes for transportation planning in our area. That's how I think about it. It doesn't mean that's the only way that this document is useful, or these conversations with our legislators as a group is useful. But I do think it's valuable for us to come together with a consensus statement of everybody involved in the PRTPO to show our unity and purpose and mission, and that we're cooperating together, and that our representatives don't have to choose between us, at this stage. Like, we do have a common mission and common vision, even though when it comes down to funding particular projects, sometimes choices do happen. Thanks.
Sarah?
I'm wondering to the broadband, and Lindsay, that was really helpful. I was just making a lot of notes here. And I'm wondering regarding the broadband and Ed's point, maybe, I noticed, I don't think it's on the secondary messages, but maybe the thing to emphasize is how they distribute that money, and to make sure, and just to keep reiterating the message, the importance of broadband in rural communities, of eliminating the barriers that distance and time present to people, especially if they want to reduce VMT and all this other kind of stuff that's really hard to do in rural regions. Maybe that's the way to approach that, less about a project per se, and more about encourage them to continue to emphasize universal access even throughout our most rural communities, and similar to the messaging that you were just saying, Lindsay, the importance of that to our communities and why it matters, so that if they're going to get this huge amount of money to allocate, we want to make sure that they use keep rural communities in mind as they're thinking through that process. Might be one way of doing that.
I have a question about that, because I, again, had a private conversation with someone, and right now I'm not remembering who, but they were saying that the Makah still have trouble getting broadband access out on their reservation. And that's critical. Bud was always at every one of our meetings, and we haven't seen him since we've relied on the internet or Zoom for our meetings. So we're missing that piece. And I didn't mean to discourage you. I just want to, what can we do? And our message is it has to be used rurally also, that is a transportation element. And how do we get it? Just like Ted experienced today, and Randy experienced not that long ago, because Randy, I'm sure, was somewhere in Mason County trying to connect to a meeting, and he couldn't get access. And Ted, had a great deal of difficulty today in Southern Oregon. Rural access is critical. Again, we'll go to Ed and then Leslie.
So here's just a radical thought that might be outside of our wheelhouse, but then we define our wheelhouse if we're not constricted by legislative prescription. And that is for a lot of these smaller entities, tribes, you name the public entity, okay? It's an impossible hurdle for them to apply because they don't have the technical expertise to even put the grant application together on what they're trying to describe. without spending a lot of money on outside consultants. So it's like dog chasing tail, right? And so then nothing happens. I'm wondering, Thera, about the ability for PRTPO to act to apply for money to support our various jurisdictional members with technical support that they would have to execute on, because that's the first hurdle. And I think SBO would be very open to that.
Yeah, the tricky part for us, Ed, is our budget. So PRTPO has enough budget from the legislature for about 15 hours of staff a week total. That's it. I mean, we make it look like we're, you know, got a bigger budget than that. You know, we try to be highly efficient but we just even, and to Beck's earlier point about this, what PSRC or RTC's capacity, they've got so many staff, and they've got more. If we were a different kind of an organization, more fully staffed, if the legislature actually really funded regional planning, you know, we could do that. But right now, it would be hard to even bring a group of people together and flesh out what something like
there
this
would be administrative subsidy to see something like this done, because remember, it's BEAD money, which is equity and access.
Yeah.
And we're probably a major recipient target per federal regulation for that if we could put something together, right? And
well,
bootstrap.
Department of Commerce, so I do know Department of Commerce got funding from the legislature this past session to help small local and tribal agencies complete grants for other kinds of transportation projects. Not to deliver the projects. I told them they ought to also give them money to, you know, help manage those projects as well. But maybe that same kind of a program could extend to, because you're right, it's the same thing's happening on the EV side. People don't have the technical expertise in-house to even know how to complete the applications.
So
you know?
Here's a big help, maybe. August 23rd, next week at 2 p.m. is that question and answer session with Mark Vasconi and Mark Barkley and the whole group, Michael Fong. We could dial into that, and it's supposed to be Q&A and pose the question at no risk and no obligation, right? Maybe Beck could be part of that with Thera and what have you. Nothing to be lost if not gained.
I'd say send me the information, and if I can, you know, it's just good to be aware of it. I know that broadband is a huge issue for our region. So if there's a way that we can constructively bring attention to needs of the region, we definitely want to do that.
Leslie and then Ted.
Thanks so much. I'm just going back to this idea that this is a legislative agenda conversation. And so I think the comparison to the RAISE grant is an interesting one, because, you know, the PRTPO is not sponsoring any particular, is not addressing the cross-county collaboration directly. It's just saying it's a priority, right? And so maybe for the similar broadband issue, we just need to make sure that it's stated on page 1 or page 2 so that it's there. And then the practical questions that Ed is bringing up, we can work on to figure out what that collaboration across the counties looks like. But it seems like for this conversation, what we want to do is just get it up there on page 1 or page 2, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, Leslie. That would fit in neatly with the format and the time that we have available to pull it off.
Ted?
Yeah, Leslie, great comments. I was part of the broadband expansion grant committee this last year, and it was 4 months of hard working to get that grant into Mason County. I do believe broadband is part of our transportation scheme in some way or another. I understand, Beck, PRTPO does not take money. It needs to go to the counties. But also you really do need partners in this stuff, whether it's different nonprofits, whether it's the county. But to get these grants done, it takes a lot of work. We just lost, I don't know if anybody in Kitsap did the last Washington Commerce grant where they were looking for digital navigators, and they had 14.1 billion there. I tried to do it through Mason County. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any partners to do it. So I think it's part of our transportation scheme some way or the other, but I agree that we don't need to put it on there as a money maker for PTR, PTO. So.
Is there anyone else? So what I'm hearing is we're going to ask Sarah to put these messages together wonderfully. I don't want to say generically, but to indicate how we as a region, how safety is important to us as a region, and how we want the legislature to continue to pursue that broadband, again, is critical to us, and just make sure those issues don't go away. Is that kind of what I heard? And the same thing goes with the Hood Canal Bridge and that federal fund swap with state dollars. We worked really hard on that, and we don't want that to go away either. So.
And Beck, could I also ask a question? There's been discussion in the legislative work group about possibly, since if safety is a priority in this go round, should the project list be restricted to just safety projects? Would that help drive the point home? Do all of our members have unfunded safety projects that they, normally we don't, we just ask, what, you know, give us a project. We don't ask our members to give us a particular kind of a project. Would it be useful if we tried to focus the list on safety projects? I don't know the answer to that, so wanted to pose that.
No one is speaking because no one is offering, you know, a strong message either way. I would, again, put it back to the jurisdictions, whatever is going to meet the individual jurisdictions' needs.
And what I will be doing then is I will be reaching out through the TAC, through the Technical Advisory Committee, to assemble a project list. And then in September, when they meet, they will get a first chance at looking at something, a better draft than what you all were working with today, where we start trying out the messages, and they will help me refine that. And then we will send that draft back to the legislative work group for their review and revision and whatever, what to do with it. And then we will bring that draft from the legislative work group back to you all in October for your final review and edits and approval. And then we will move, I mean, we already need to be starting to think about the forum, if we're going to be doing a forum later this fall. So we'll be asking the legislative work group for direction on that and bringing all of that back to you in October.
Okay, we have run over a little bit, and it is important, and I don't know, Ed, if we have anyone either via Zoom or in person, but we do need to allow for public comment. And we're a little tardy in making that public comment available. But if there is anyone either in person at the Kitsap Transit offices or on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment, now would be the time to do that. Please raise your hand and we will let you in the meeting. Okay, I'm not hearing none. If people have joined us at a certain time to make public comment, I want to make sure that they have that availability to do that. And I also want to point out, because we have run over, I want to point out our coordinator's report. It's full of a lot of good information. If you haven't had an opportunity to read it yet, I would invite you to do that. I would also invite our board members, anyone who has any comments currently on that legislative outlook piece or any other discussions that we've had. I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to voice their opinion or state their comment. I want to make sure everyone has had an opportunity. And also, is there anything else for the good of, that anyone wants to share for the good of our organization? Okay, seeing none, we will stand adjourned and we will see everybody in October. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.